Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of dense research, boil it down, and, well, we deliver the actionable core right to you. Today, we are tackling what has to be the single most frustrating human experience: self-sabotage.
Oh, absolutely.
It's that paradox, of knowing exactly what you should be doing, eating healthy, getting to bed, starting that huge project.
And then consistently doing the exact opposite, the thing you know you'll hate yourself for later.
Exactly.
And it's this cycle that makes people feel like they lack character or, willpower. But the sources we pull together for this, from neuroscience labs to behavioral economics think tanks, they prove that whole narrative is just completely wrong.
It's not a moral failure.
Not at all. It's fundamentally about automatic neurological patterns. It's
Yeah.
about an evolved brain architecture that's designed for efficiency, not necessarily for your long-term fulfillment.
That is the key takeaway right there. So our mission today is to move past that old advice of just try harder. We're going to explore the precise mechanisms that defeat our rational thoughts, the dopamine traps, the psychological shortcuts, and then crucially, lay out the systematic intervention points, the ones that don't rely on willpower to create lasting structural change.
Right. We're treating the human brain like a system that needs an update, not a character flaw that needs more discipline. It's about designing an environment and a mindset that makes the right behavior the default.
Okay, so let's start with section 1, defining the trap itself. Why do our brains seem to be actively working against our better judgment?
So the foundation of any of these unwanted behaviors is what's known as the habit loop. You have a cue, a routine, and a reward.
Right. And what's so counterintuitive in the research is understanding where the motivation for that routine actually lives. Most of us think dopamine is the pleasure chemical, released when we get the reward.
That's the classic misconception. It's the one that derails pretty much every New Year's resolution. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. It's the anticipation chemical.
It's the anticipation.
Yes. The critical discovery is that the powerful surge of dopamine happens not when you get the reward, but at the cue, the thing that triggers the unwanted behavior.
So if you're trying to avoid, say, checking social media,
Yeah.
that intense feeling of, I need to look at my phone, that's not satisfaction.
No, it's pure, powerful anticipation. It's craving. It's your brain screaming, the reward is coming, initiate the sequence.
Wow.
And it gets deeper. The sources point out that once a habit is really formed, the dopamine system just gets used to the reward. It stops responding to the actual pleasure of scrolling or eating the junk food.
So the pleasure is gone, but the habit isn't.
Exactly. 100% of the dopamine function shifts to the triggering cue. And that is why these deeply unsatisfying habits, the ones you hate 5 minutes later, still persist. They are driven entirely by the anticipation from the cue, not the enjoyment of the routine itself.
And that mechanism points to a bigger neurological shift, right? When a behavior is new, it's controlled by your prefrontal cortex. It's conscious, it's goal-directed. But what happens is we repeat it.
With repetition, control shifts. It moves deep into the brain, specifically to a region called the dorsolateral striatum. You can think of the striatum as your brain's autopilot. It's muscle memory factory.
So it takes the conscious, effortful plan and just stamps it down into an automatic routine.
A stimulus response routine. And the key thing I'm pulling from the sources here is that this automation isn't neutral. The behavior becomes automatic before it even reaches your conscious awareness.
So by the time I have the thought, maybe I shouldn't, the physical sequence has already started.
Yeah.
The brain is hardwired for that speed over rational thought.
It's prioritizing immediate efficiency. And that's where the 3 core psychological traps from behavioral economics come in and just defeat our rational mind. The first one is called hyperbolic discounting.
It sounds like a textbook title, but it's incredibly relatable.
It just means we massively overvalue immediate rewards, like the temporary stress relief from procrastinating, or the sugar hit over much bigger, distant future rewards, like finishing the project or being healthy.
The emotional part of the brain is just overpowering the rational part.
Every single time. Present you wins the debate. Which leads right into the second trap, which philosophers call akrasia, temporal inconsistency.
Basically acting against your own better judgment.
Yes. Your 8 p.m. self knows that binge-watching TV will make your 6 a.m. self miserable. But 8 p.m. self is operating with a completely different reward system, what feels totally logical in that emotional, immediate moment.
Seems rational later. You're almost like a different person.
You are. And the final mechanism, which is so relevant today, is limited attention capacity. When you're under stress, your brain just prioritizes the most painful, immediate stimulus.
And the self-destructive behavior, the scrolling, the eating it offers the only accessible immediate distraction. It's a survival mechanism that gets hijacked.
Right, but understanding those traps, the anticipation loop, the discount rate, that gives us the perfect entry points for intervention. We don't need more willpower. We need better design.
Absolutely. So let's pivot from diagnosis to the actual strategies. The research is clear. You have to intervene at specific points in that loop. And the very first step is critical because, as you said, something like 80 to 90% of our habits happen without us even noticing.
This is intervention 1, awareness training. You have to name the shadow before you can deal with it. And the data here is incredibly hopeful. Studies show that just documenting and recognizing the pattern, doing nothing else, reduces the unwanted behavior by 20 to 35%.
Just by observing it, it starts to shrink. So how do we observe something that's automated?
The first technique is response detection logging. For 1 week, you just document every single instance, the time, the location, your emotional state, what happened right before, without trying to change it.
You're not judging, you're just a detective collecting data.
You're collecting forensic data. You need to know that your scrolling habit always starts at 4:30 p.m., right after a stressful email, and specifically when you're sitting in the kitchen. That specificity is key.
Then we move to the physical level with something called urge surfing.
Right. This is about identifying the actual physical feeling of the urge, that specific tension in your shoulders or tightness in your chest, about 5 to 10 seconds before the behavior usually starts.
And you map out the little micro behaviors that come right before the main action.
Those are the early warning signs. For a smoker, it might be, shifting their weight, reaching into their pocket, clearing their throat. For a procrastinator, maybe it's opening a new tab, moving their mouse, and sighing. If you can catch that third micro behavior.
You still have time to interrupt the loop.
You do. Which brings us to intervention 2, competing response training. Once you can spot the cue and the early warnings, you need a pre-programmed physical response that makes the old habit mechanically impossible.
I love this because it totally bypasses willpower. Willpower is a muscle, it gets tired.
A competing response is a lock on the door. It's a mechanical block, not a mental one. A simple example is clenching your fists. It just physically prevents nail biting. If your hands are busy, the action can't happen.
Okay, but the requirements for this to work are pretty strict, right?
Yeah, they are. The replacement has to be physically impossible to do at the same time as the old habit. It has to be socially acceptable. You can't do something weird in a meeting. And most importantly, it has to be something you can sustain for 60 to 180 seconds.
Why that specific time frame?
Because that's long enough to successfully outlast the peak of the urge. The research shows this kind of response prevention interrupts 65 to 75% of habit executions, just by creating that physical incompatibility.
That's a huge return for a pretty small effort. So now let's talk about automating these better choices.
Yeah.
This brings us to intervention 3, implementation intentions.
These are your software update. They are rigid, pre-decided if-then plans that hand control back to your brain's automation system. The format has to be precise. If specific cue, then I will specific replacement behavior in order to specific goal.
It sounds almost too simple to be so powerful, but the results they're dramatic. Meta-analyses show success rates are 2 to 3 times higher than just having a general goal. They're basically instant habits.
They are, and the rigidity is why they work. It takes the decision-making completely out of the equation. When you just have a goal, like I want to be healthier, you still have to find motivation in the moment.
But the if-then plan bypasses that choice.
It does. And the if statement needs to be a specific sensory trigger when I turn off my alarm at 6:30 a.m., not something vague like when I want to exercise.
We're hijacking the brain's own preference for automation, but feeding it a better routine.
Precisely. And you need to be just as specific with the then behavior. I will do 10 squats is much stronger than I will move my body. And critically, you have to mentally rehearse it. See the cue, imagine the response 3 to 5 times. You're strengthening that neural link before you're even in the situation.
So that's the software update. Now for the hardware update. Friction engineering, redesigning your environment.
This just leverages the simple reality that our brain defaults to the easiest option 95% of the time. Behavior follows the path of least resistance. So we manipulate the resistance.
Increasing friction for the bad habits, decreasing it for the good ones.
Exactly. To increase friction for something bad, you could just log out of social media after each use. That small extra step, adding 8 to 12 seconds to type your password, reduces impulsive checking by a reported 35%.
It's incredible. We try to find these complex solutions when the answer is just adding one extra click.
Or placing junk food in opaque, hard-to-reach containers on a high shelf. That subtle change can reduce consumption by 40 to 60% because the visual cue and easy access are gone.
The opposite works for good behaviors. Laying out your exercise clothes the night before, that one little act increases morning workout completion by 50%.
Or pre-cutting vegetables and putting them right at eye level in the fridge. This also involves something the research calls context disruption. Habits are neurologically tied to locations. If you always procrastinate at your kitchen table,
You have to disrupt that environment. Sit in a different chair, work in another room, even just put on a different kind of music. You're breaking the context that triggers the memory of the bad habit. Okay, now let's get to the deeper levers in Section 4. We talked logistics, but how do we change the underlying driver of our behavior? This starts with identity-based habits.
yes. Focusing on who you are produces 3 to 4 times greater long-term success than just focusing on outcomes. You shift from doing to being.
So how does that work?
The sources lay out a simple 3-step process. First, you decide the type of person you want to become. Not someone who loses 20 pounds, but a healthy person or a person who keeps their promises.
The identity is the goal.
Second, you prove it with small wins. Every single action, every time you choose the competing response, every time you sit down to work is a vote for that new identity.
And third,
You let that identity drive your behavior. A non-smoker doesn't debate quitting. They just turn down a cigarette because it contradicts who they are now.
this works because of cognitive consistency, right?
Right.
When our actions contradict our self-image, we feel this discomfort, cognitive dissonance, and it creates this automatic, non-depleting motivation to get back in line.
Exactly. And we also need to address the internal dialogue that keeps these habits going. That's done through cognitive reframing. Habits persist because of cognitive distortions, systematic errors in our thinking.
This is where we stop just believing our distorted thoughts and actually challenge them. For example, moving from all or nothing thinking.
Like, I broke my diet with 1 cookie, so I might as well binge on the whole box.
Right, and you reframe that into continuum thinking. One lapse is a data point, not a complete failure. I'm back on track right now.
Or shifting from catastrophizing, if I fail this report, my whole career is over, to decatastrophizing. This is one task, not my entire life. I can still submit a high-quality draft. The key here isn't just analyzing the thoughts. It's using behavioral experiments to actually test if those negative beliefs are true.
Okay, next up is a wonderfully clever technique for making unpleasant things instantly rewarding. Temptation bundling.
This is pairing a high gratification want activity with a necessary should behavior. The foundational research on this is amazing. It showed that people who are only allowed to listen to an engaging audiobook while exercising increased their gym attendance by 51%.
That's a huge difference.
Why?
Because you're no longer dreading the gym.
You're anticipating the next chapter of your book. It reduces guilt and creates real anticipation for the activity you're supposed to be doing.
Okay, finally, let's wrap this up with intrinsic motivation, which comes from self-determination theory.
This is all about the 3 basic psychological needs that generate motivation that doesn't run out: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. If your new behavior meets these needs, the change becomes self-sustaining.
And in practical terms,
You frame the change as your choice. That supports autonomy. You break big goals into micro skills to build weight. Competence feeling skilled is a powerful motivator. And you join a community where the desired behavior is the norm. That's relatedness. The motivation comes from inside the activity itself.
and this whole system can be sort of summarized by the fog behavior model, right? B equals MAP.
Behavior equals motivation times ability times prompt. If the behavior isn't happening, one of those 3 things is too low. If the ability is low, a 30-minute workout feels too hard, you simplify it. You do 5 push-ups.
If motivation is low, you use temptation bundling or shift your identity.
Right. And the crucial part is the compensatory relationship. High motivation can overcome low ability, and high ability can overcome low motivation. If you make the behavior incredibly easy, you need almost 0 motivation to do it.
And bringing all these pieces together is what's necessary for real lasting change. You can't just do one.
You have to intervene at multiple points. The sources suggest a structured, integrated plan that covers awareness, environment, intentions, and identity all at once. The old habit is defended by multiple systems, so you have to attack it with multiple systems.
So as we synthesize all this, there's one key overarching principle that kind of brings it all full circle.
And that is that habits break not through elimination or suppression. In fact, trying to suppress a thought or an urge, it just strengthens the neural pathway. You're forcing your attention onto it. You can't unautomate a behavior.
So the path forward isn't subtraction, it's systematic replacement.
Yes. You have to create an alternative, high-quality routine that is triggered by the exact same cue. That's why competing responses and implementation intentions are so powerful.
That one idea fundamentally changes how we should approach self-improvement.
Precisely. The research is so clear on this. These self-defeating patterns persist not because of a moral failure, but because of evolved neural mechanisms that are optimizing for immediate survival, not for long-term flourishing.
So the pathway out begins not with more discipline, but with intentional design. You have all the tools now, the map of the shadow has been drawn.